Thank you, Kim and Patrick, for those nice comments. I just want to say thank you to all of you, funders and grant makers and writers and nonprofits. You know, it's amazing when I'm 64 years old, and my family moved here in Arizona when I was 9 years old, and I grew up literally right here. 20th Street in Camelback is where I grew up and graduated from Madison #1 grade school. And I was the student body president of Madison #1 grade school back in, way back, in about 1963. And then went to Camelback High School, grew on the Spartan Camelback High School, and then to ASU. And my whole life has been really Arizona and watching it change. And some for the better and some for the worse. And while Kim and Patrick have said they've observed me for a few decades, I've observed the fantastic work that your organizations do. Because as we all know, it's a pretty conservative state. Budgets in good times and bad are pretty lean. And that fundraising and giving and grants and tapping in to the federal government, et cetera, has just been so critical to Arizona's future. So I thank you and keep up the good work. I try to cram as much as I can because when I was asked to come, I was asked to give an overview of the state capitol, preview the legislative session, what are the major issues, what does the state budget look like, and then always try to give you sort of the real skinny, what's really going on. And when you talk about the state capitol and public policy making, there's no way you can get away from that grisly world of politics. So I'll also try to give you a dose of reality throughout this presentation as well. And there will be time for questions. And if there's something you just gotta say right now that you're mad that I said, or have a question, don't put your hand up. And if I don't see it, scream out. That's fine. There are political storm clouds over the Capitol in both political parties as the legislative session begins. We are in the second week of the second regular session of the 51st legislature. And you just have to understand the dynamics politically. I'm sure you remember that that last year, in 2013, during the regular session, the political tension was huge, and it was mainly over the Medicaid expansion, with Governor Brewer proposing a year ago in her State of the State speech that she wanted to expand Medicaid, restore cuts that had been made in Medicaid, and frankly plug into Obamacare, that Arizona should be proactive and plug right into Obamacare. A lot of people were shocked when this came out of the mouth of Jan Brewer, and somebody who has wagged her finger in front of the president in the tarmac at Sky Harbor, and someone that is still very conservative. But when it came to Medicaid expansion and Obamacare, she was a pragmatist. While she opposed it and was hoping it could be repealed, she realized that once Barack Obama got elected to a second term, that wasn't going to happen. And so her staff and the Medicaid system here in Arizona convinced the governor that it was the smart financial thing to do and humanitarian thing to do. And they could restore a lot of people that had been cut out of the Medicaid system, a lot of families and a lot of kids. Not enough, unfortunately, but still many. And so she embraced it. Well, she's in the Republican Party, and the Republicans control the legislature, and the Republican leadership in particular, very conservative. The Republican Party today is the Tea Party. The party activists, the precinct committeemen, they are Tea Party oriented. They want no part of Obamacare. You also had an entity called the Goldwater Institute, which is a conservative public policy organization that is very much into advocacy, that has a major impact on the legislature. It's one of the most impactful entities now at the state capitol. And Goldwater Institute very much against Obamacare, and was very much against the state of Arizona embracing it and letting it come into Arizona. They constantly are going to court, et cetera, and trying to stop federal programs in many cases. So that combination of the Tea Party from a Republican perspective, and then the Goldwater Institute, which is more libertarian probably than Republican, that was something that the governor just could not overcome within her own Republican group of legislators. And so she did something that we haven't seen in a long, long time. She helped lead a bipartisan coalition at the Capitol. At the end of the session, when the Medicaid expansion and restoration bill passed, and that was a major part of the state budget, so the governor's budget also passed, it passed with every single Democrat voting for it. Just to refresh your memory, in the state Senate there are 17 Republicans and 13 Democrats. You need 16 votes to pass anything. There were 6 Republicans, I'll call them, for want of a better word, pragmatic Republicans that agreed with the governor on accepting Obamacare into Arizona. So you had 6 going with the 13, and they were able to pass it. In the House, there are 36 Republicans and 24 Democrats. And you had all 24 Democrats voting with the governor, not only for the Medicaid expansion, but also her budget. And you had 9 pragmatic Republicans joining those Democrats. So you need 31 votes to pass anything in the House, and you were able to get 33 votes. And for the first time ever, the Democrats, for the first, not ever, well, ever since Jan Brewer was governor, for the first time in 6 years, the Democrats had a seat at the table and was able to put some things into the budget, into Governor Brewer's budget that they wanted, some additional funding, et cetera. Realizing that there still is not enough revenue coming into the state, and that causes restrictions on what you can spend, because in Arizona, unlike the federal government, our Constitution demands a balanced budget. Anyway, so it was a true bipartisan coalition with the Republican governor, with just enough pragmatic Republicans going along with the Democrats, and they rolled Republican leadership. They rolled the Tea Party. And that has not been forgotten. And in fact, those pragmatic Republicans, many of them already have primary opposition coming in late August of this year. 2014 is an election year. And there are Tea Party people that are running against some of those pragmatic Republicans and trying to knock them off because they went with the Democrats. And Brewer now is, I guess, considered some pinko liberal by the Tea Party. So it's a very tense environment within the Republican caucuses. But it's not all calm in the Democratic caucuses either. And I'm particularly mentioning the state Senate Democratic caucus, where you have 13 of them. Very surprising to many of us, in October, the Democratic caucus in the Senate met and overthrew their leader, Leah Landrum Taylor, Senator Leah Landrum Taylor of Phoenix. By an 8-5 vote, they elected in the middle of the 2-year session cycle, which is very unusual, a new minority leader in the Senate, who is Anna Tovar, Senator Tovar of Phoenix. So it wasn't a Phoenix-Tucson thing that they threw out a Phoenician and put in a Phoenician. But that has created a lot of rumbling in the Democratic caucus, and they're not exactly united at this point. So it's a very tense environment left over from 2013 as the 2014 session begins. When I was giving this address a couple weeks ago, a few weeks ago, before the governor's budget came out, I guess I was indirectly predicting that bipartisan coalition might be needed again this year because of all the tension and because the governor's budget was going to be spending more money than the Tea Party wanted. That same coalition may be enlisted again to pass a budget late this current session. After looking at the governor's budget, which we're going to go into in some depth, I'm not so sure that's going to be necessary. It's a pretty conservative budget. And so I think the Republican leadership actually may not want to be rolled again, particularly in an election year, and it may be more of a Republican-only type budget that we see passing in 2014. But that remains to be seen. Before we get into details of the session, if I give you political reality, and I mentioned that it was an election year, I want to mention something about dark money and try to give you, for those of you that are not political junkies, just to remind you what dark money is. I passed out, should be on your tables, there's a Washington Post article I scribbled on a dark money, and attached to that article is a very complicated looking colored chart. Let me just try to put it in real basic terms. In the old days meaning just about 10 years ago, campaign financing, while it was painful, at least it was predictable and there was full disclosure. A candidate would create a committee and ask people to contribute, and there would be, in statute, certain amounts that you could contribute, and you couldn't go over that. And the candidates, whether they were running for local or statewide or federal offices, particularly statewide, I'll center my attention on now, the candidates had to report how much money they raised every few months to the Secretary of State's office, and who gave it to them, their names, addresses, and their occupations. And that was public record, and the press could write about it, and you stayed within certain limits. And there it was. That was pretty clear cut. You could see who was supporting a candidate, who had the most money, and so forth. Then this animal came about called independent expenditures, or in the political junkie world, IEs. These are entities that can collect money from more sources. The candidates cannot accept corporate contributions. IEs can. And IEs have far more flexibility, and they're not as long as they don't coordinate. They run campaigns also for or against a candidate. The majority of them are negative campaigners. That's why you see all the negative TV ads and so forth that you, I'm sure, are reviled at as other people are. But the independent expenditures, they can spend a ton of money, raise more money really than candidates if they're aggressive enough, but still, those IEs have to report to the Secretary of State's office. And the media or you as a citizen can go down and look at the records, and you will know how much money the IE is spending, the independent expenditure. And you can see where the money goes, where they spend it on. And you can see who gives them money. That's the most important part. You know, what corporations, what Patrick may give to candidates, but he's also given even more money to IEs that oppose or support a certain candidate. So you can sort of track that. Still full disclosure. But now we have gotten to a new point in our history that just started to reveal itself in the 2012 election. And that is what I refer to as dark money. What has happened is there is a giant loophole in the law, in the federal IRS regulations. And some of you nonprofits will cringe when I say this. It's the nonprofit world where the loophole exists. What very shrewd political types have done, and that article talks about it. Up till now, about 80% of the activity of dark money has come from the right wing, very conservative entity, the Koch brothers and so forth, Karl Rove's outfit, et cetera, et cetera. But believe me, the left is starting to play in the game as well because they're getting killed by the right. And what happens is they establish a nonprofit entity, and it's a loophole that they call themselves a social welfare organization, and they claim they're doing things for social public policy reasons, but they're out and out camp. They're doing the hit pieces and the hit commercials that you hear on radio and see on TV. But here's the huge loophole. These nonprofit social welfare organizations do not have to report who gives them money. They collected and spent $400 million nationally, these new entities have in 2012, and they didn't have to say where they got a penny. And what they do is they can't run the campaign because they're a nonprofit social welfare organization, but they can move their money. They are money launderers, is what they are. They're campaign money launderers. Let's call it what it is. They hate it when people say that, but it's the truth. They take the money from, up till now, basically right-wingers, wealthy right-wingers, right-wing corporations, and they take that money and then they give it as a contribution to an IE that then uses the money for or against a candidate or a ballot initiative. But the IE has to report where they get their money, right? But they don't know where the nonprofit got it. So they just list the name of the nonprofit. That's all they have to do. And that is what has become dark money. So IEs are getting millions of dollars, and we don't know where that money, who gave that money and where it's coming from. That's the gist of the Washington Post article. What is fascinating about this is, if you look at that colored chart, you'll notice that one of the big organizations that launders the money, I think it's in the color blue if I'm not mistaken, it's called the Center to Protect Patient Rights, CPPR. That's a Phoenix-based outfit. It is run by a guy named Sean Noble. Sean Noble was the chief of staff for many years for Congressman John Shattuck, who I went to grade school with at Madison No. 1 grade school, we're the same age. And Sean Noble has become sort of a major player and ringleader in the dark money nonprofit world. And the former Speaker of the House, Kirk Adams, is a colleague of his who's also running these organizations. I'm shocked that not listed on that chart is an outfit called the Americans for Responsible Leadership. That is a Phoenix-based organization that's only a couple of years old, and it gets a ton of money from CPR. They launder this stuff. They move it to Americans for Responsible Leadership, who gave money, by the way, in 2012 to help defeat, gave it to the no campaigns to defeat 2 ballot propositions in 2012. One of them was the education proposition, Prop 204. They worked against that, and the other bit of no money went to against the ballot proposition 121, which was the top 2 primary reform measure that was clobbered. And some of that no money came from these type of outfits. I will also, calling it like I see it here, tell you that if you go down to the Arizona Corporation Commission and you look for the incorporation forms that were filled out in 2012 to create the Americans for Responsible Leadership nonprofit, one of the leading individuals, the 2 or 3 officers that incorporated it, was a guy named Robert Graham. And he is now the chairman of the Arizona Republican Party. And so, I mean, this dark money is prevalent, and a lot of people believe that for the first time it is going to be used in 2014 to impact our state races, our statewide races in particular, for governor, secretary of state, treasurer, and so forth. And so it'll be interesting to watch as the commercials come and the hit pieces come, how the media is able to find out where this money is coming from. It's going to be hard because of the loopholes. But that's dark money. It exists. There is you can try to lift the rock up. California has done so. They passed statewide legislation, not connected with the IRS regs, statewide legislation stating that nonprofit 501c4s, which is what these entities are, that they do have to disclose where they got their money before it's transmitted to an IE. And Americans for Responsible Leadership out of Phoenix was nailed for not doing that. They participated and tried to impact a couple of ballot propositions in California in 2012. And they got fined $1 million for not divulging that information. Most states, including Arizona, does not have any such law. A legislator is supposed to introduce a bill in the next week or 2 that will try to do what California does to a certain degree. I don't lose any sleep over whether that's going to pass. When the chairman of the Republican Party has been involved in the past with dark money, and it's a Republican-controlled legislature, I question how far that's going to go. The other major storm clouds, of course, is DES, CPS. I don't have to tell you, you all stay in touch with the news, you've all read the headlines. We have the highest number of reports of all the states in child abuse and neglect, have for some time. And to be very blunt, nobody can answer the question why. There's a lot of hypotheses. We'll get into some of them, but CPS has been a problem for 25 years at least. And it blew up really in October when they found the 6,500 NIs, not investigated cases. The media were shocked and headlines galore, and it's really impacted the entire budget process, and we're going to get into that as well. So certainly Stormclouds over DES, and that is the major budget issue for this session. Last year it was Medicaid expansion, Obamacare coming to Arizona, but CPS is the dominant issue this year.